Welcome, everyone. Thank you once again for reconvening and joining together for an immersion in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. I hope everyone had a wonderful, meaningful, and delicious Passover, and that you were able to gather either at your table in your presence or perhaps virtually through Zoom to reconnect with people during this holiday that celebrates the awesome responsibility that is our freedom. And so it's wonderful that we can take this opportunity that we've given ourselves and that has been afforded us to regather and re-immerse ourselves in this body of wisdom. I want to tell you that yesterday was my mother's 99th birthday.
Oh, how marvelous.
Thank you. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to dedicate tonight's study to my mother. Absolutely. For all of the wonderful wisdom and grace she has shared with me and literally thousands of others over the course of her life and continues to do so. Thanks very much, Mom. Love you. Oh, so the thing, you call that it?
So every week, Stephen's mother listens to the whole Torah study. She's fallen in love with all of you. She mentions your comments. She waits eagerly for it to be transcribed so she can hear it. So would you join me in singing Yom Haledet?
So why don't you go ahead and unmute, and all together we can sing Yom Haledet to my mother. Thank you.
Sing that.
Yom Haledet, Yom Haledet, Yom Haledet, Yom Haledet,
Gam Harbeod.
Happy birthday, Mom, and
Love
thank
you.
you all very much. And so now let's take the opportunity to, as we remain unmuted, to go ahead and say our blessing for this wonderful opportunity of immersing ourselves in words and deeds and relationships of Torah. Together we recite our blessing. Baruch atah
Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. And this week we are in Parshat Shemini, which is in the book of Leviticus at the very start of chapter 9. And Parshat Shemini is kind of unique within the book of Leviticus because it contains one of the only two narrative portions within the book of Leviticus. It has an actual story that's being told. So we'll encounter that story as we do our reading. I'd love to share with you the opening verses, and then I'll invite others to share in the reading as well. So chapter 9, verse 1, the book of Leviticus. On the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a calf of the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and bring them before Adonai. And speak to the Israelites, saying, take a he-goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, yearlings without blemish for a burnt offering, and an ox and a ram for an offering of well-being to sacrifice before Adonai, and a meal offering with oil mixed in. For today, Adonai will appear to you." We're now on verse 5. And Steve Brenton, would you like to start reading there?
Thank you. They brought to the front of the tent of meeting the things that Moses had commanded, and the community leadership came forward and stood before the Eternal. Moses said, "This is what the Eternal has commanded that you do, that the presence of the Eternal may appear to you." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Come forward to the altar and sacrifice your purgation offering and your burnt offering." make expiation for yourself and for the people, and sacrifice the people's offering and make expiation for them, as the Eternal has commanded. Aaron came forward to the altar and slaughtered his calf of purgation offering. Aaron's sons brought the blood to him. He dipped his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar. And he poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. The fat, the kidneys, and the protuberance of the liver from the purgation offering, he turned into smoke on the altar, as the Eternal had commanded Moses. And the flesh and the skin were consumed in fire outside the camp.
Thank you so much, Steve. Let me invite Mark Thompson. Would you like to read starting there at verse 12?
Thank you, Rabbi. Then he slaughtered the burnt offering. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, and he dashed it against all sides of the altar. They passed the burnt offering to him in sections, as well as the head, and he turned it into smoke on the altar. He washed the entrails and the legs and turned them into smoke on the altar with the burnt offering. Next, he brought forward the people's offering. He took the goat for the people's sin offering and slaughtered it and presented it as a sin offering like the previous one. He brought forward the burnt offering and sacrificed it according to regulation. He then brought forward the meal offering, and taking a handful of it, he turned it into smoke on the altar, in addition to the burnt offering of the morning. He slaughtered the ox and the ram, the people's sacrifice of well-being. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, which he dashed against every side of the altar, and the fat parts of the ox and the ram, the broad tail, the covering, fat, the kidneys, and the protuberances of the livers. They laid these fat parts over the breasts, and Aaron turned the fat parts into smoke on the altar and elevated the breasts and the right thighs as an elevation offering before Adonai, as Moses had commanded.
Thank you, Mark. We're now on verse 22. Jim and Peggy, would you like to read a little bit starting there?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. Aaron lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them. And he stepped down after offering the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the offering of well-being. Moses and Aaron then went inside the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of Adonai appeared to all the people. Fire came forth from before Adonai and consumed the burnt offering and the fat parts on the altar. And all the people saw and shouted and fell on their faces.
Now Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan, put fire in it, and laid incense on it. And they offered before Adonai alien fire, which he had not enjoined upon them. And fire came forth from Adonai and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of Adonai. Then Moses said to Aaron, this is what the Adonai meant when he said, through those near to me, I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people. And Aaron was silent. Moses called Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Uzziel, the uncle of Aaron, and said to them, come forward and carry your kinsmen away from the front of the sanctuary to a place outside the camp. They came forward and carried them out of the camp by their tunics as Moses had ordered. And Moses said to Aaron and to his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, do not bury your heads and do not rend your clothing, lest you die and anger strike the whole community. But your kinsmen, all the house of Israel, shall bewail the burning that Adonai has wrought. And so do not go outside the entrance of the tent of meeting, lest you die. For Adonai's anointing oil is upon you, and they did as Moses had bidden.
Thank you so much. So let me invite Paul, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 8?
Okay, last time I read from the Chabad Chumash, it was different. So this Chumash is from Brooklyn and 80 years old, but still doesn't line up with you guys.
Yay, Brooklyn. Okay.
Yeah, and the Lord spoke unto Aaron, saying, wine or strong drink shalt thou not drink, neither thou nor thy sons with thee, when ye go in unto the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations, so that ye may be able to distinguish between the holy and the unholy, and between the unclean and the clean, and that ye may be able to teach the children of Israel all the statutes which the Lord has spoken unto them by the hand of Moses. And Moses spoke unto Aaron and unto Eleazar and unto Ithamar his sons, that there were left. Take ye the meal offering that is left of the fire offerings of the Lord, and eat it unleavened beside the altar, for it is most holy. And you shall eat in a holy place, because it is thy fixed portion, and the fixed portion of thy sons from the fire offerings of the Lord, for so have I been commanded. And the breast which hath been waved, and the shoulder which hath been lifted up, shall ye eat in a clean place, thou and thy sons and thy daughters with thee. For as thy fixed portion and the fixed portion of thy sons have they been given from the sacrifices of peace offerings of the children of Israel. The shoulder which is waved and the breast which is lifted up shall they bring with the fat of the fire offering, to make therewith a waving before the Lord. Then shall it be thine and thy sons with thee as a fixed portion forever, as the Lord hath commanded.
Thank you so much. And Dave, would you like to start reading at verse 16?
Then Moses inquired about the goat of sin offering, and it had already been burned. He was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's remaining sons, and said, why did you not eat the sin offering in the sacred area? For it is most holy. And he has given it to you to remove the guilt of the community, to make expiation for them before the Lord. Since its blood was not brought inside the sanctuary, you should certainly have eaten it in the sanctuary as I commanded. And Aaron spoke to Moses, see, this day they brought their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord, and such things have befallen me. Had I eaten the sin offering today, would the Lord have approved? And when Moses heard this, he approved.
Thank you so much, Dave. Let me invite Susan. Would you like to read a little bit beginning at the start of chapter 11?
Yes, thank you. Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, speak to the Israelite people thus. These are the creatures that you may eat from among all the land animals. Excuse me. Any animal that has true hoofs, with clefts through the hoofs, and that chews the cud, such you may eat. The following, however, of those that either chew the cud or have true hoofs, you shall not eat. The camel, although it chews the cud, it has no true hoofs, it is impure for you. The daemon, although it chews the cud, it has no true hoofs, it is impure for you. The hare, although it chews the cud, it has no true hoofs, it is impure for you. And the swine, although it has true hoofs with the hoofs cleft through, it does not chew the cud, it is impure for you. You shall not eat of their flesh, nor touch their carcasses, they are impure for you.
Thank you, Susan. Let me invite Mark Levenstein. Would you like to read it starting at verse 9?
It'd be my pleasure. These you may eat all that live in water, anything in water, whether in the seas or in the streams, that has fins and scales. These you may eat. But anything in the seas or in the streams that has no fins and scales, among all the swarming things of water, among all the other living creatures that are in the water, they are an abomination for you. An abomination for you they shall remain. You shall not eat of their flesh, and you shall not abominate their carcasses. Everything in water that has no fins and scales shall be an abomination for you. The following you shall abominate among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, and the black vulture. Kite, falcons of every variety, all varieties of raven, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, hawks of every variety, the little owl, the cormorant, and the great owl, the white owl, the pelican, and the bustard, the stork, herons of every variety, the hoopoe, and the bat.
Thank you, Mark. Let me invite Margot. Would you like to read starting at verse 20?
Thank you. All winged swarming things that walk on fours shall be an abomination for you. But these you may eat among all the winged swarming things that walk on fours. All that have above their feet jointed legs to leap with on the ground. One of these you may eat. Of these you may eat the following: locusts of every variety, all varieties of bald locusts, crickets of every variety, and all varieties of bald locusts. But all other winged swarming things that have 4 legs shall be an abomination for you.
Thank you, Margot. Jay, would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 24?
Thank you, Rabbi. And the following shall make you unclean. Whoever touches their carcasses shall be unclean until evening. And whoever carries the carcasses of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. Every animal that has true hoofs, but without clefts through the hoofs, or that does not chew the cud, they are unclean for you. Whoever touches them shall be unclean. Also, all animals that walk on paws, among those that walk on 4s, are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses shall be unclean until evening. Anyone who carries their carcasses shall wash his clothes and remain unclean until evening. They are unclean for you. The following shall be unclean for you from among the things that swarm on the earth: the mole, the mouse, the great lizards of every variety, the gecko, the land crocodile, the lizard, the sand lizard, and the chameleon. Those are for you the unclean among the swarming things. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall be unclean until evening. And anything on which one of them falls when dead shall be unclean, be it an article of wood or a cloth or a skin or a sack. Any such article that can be put to use shall be dipped in water, and it shall remain unclean until evening. Then it shall be clean. And if any of those falls into an earthen vessel, everything inside it shall be unclean, and the vessel itself you shall break.
Oh, Jay,
As to
thank
any
you
food
so
that they've
much.
eaten, it shall
Jay?
become unclean.
Jay, you've just
Okay.
read a
Yes,
really important verse that comes up in a very important story in Talmud. So I'm gonna highlight that and ask Justin if he'd like to read now, starting at verse 34. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. Of any food that is usually eaten, upon which water comes, will become unclean, and any beverage that is usually drunk, which is in any vessel, shall become unclean. And anything upon which any of their carcasses of these animals fall will become unclean. Thus the oven or stove shall be demolished. They are unclean. They shall be unclean to you. But the spring or a cistern or a gathering of water remains clean. However, one who touches their carcasses shall become unclean. And if of their carcass falls upon any sowing seed, which is to be sown, it remains clean. But if water is put upon the seeds and any of their carcass falls on them, they are unclean for you. If an animal that you normally eat dies, one who touches its carcass shall be unclean until evening. And one who eats of its carcass shall immerse his garments, and he shall be unclean until evening. And one who carries its carcass shall immerse his garments, and he shall be unclean until evening.
Thank you, Justin. Let me invite Robin. Would you like to read beginning at verse 41?
Yes, thank you. All the things that swarm upon the earth are an abomination. They shall not be eaten. You shall not eat among all the things that swarm upon the earth anything that crawls on its belly, or anything that walks on fours, or anything that has many legs, for they are an abomination. You shall not draw abomination upon yourselves through anything that swarms. You shall not make yourselves impure therewith, and thus become impure. For I, Adonai, am your God. You shall sanctify yourselves and be holy, for I am holy. You shall not make yourselves impure through any swarming thing that moves upon the earth. For I, Adonai, am the one who brought you up from the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall be holy, for I am holy. These are the instructions concerning animals, birds, all living creatures that move in water, and all creatures that swarm on earth, for distinguishing between the impure and the pure, between the living things that may be eaten and the living things that may not be eaten.
Thank you so much, Robin, and thank you, everyone. That's our entire portion for this week. And I have to say that you're reading it out loud, you're vocalizing it, really helped enhance the sense of the drama of this portion for me, and highlighted kind of the structure of it, which really increases the sense of drama that's happening within the portion. Here's the setting. We open up the portion on the 8th day. For 8 days, Moses has been preparing the Mishkan, and the priests themselves have been preparing themselves to get ready to be anointed for the origination, the original service unto God of this sacrificial system. So at the very beginning, the first several verses, the first chapter indeed, sets up that context for us of the Mishkan is now ready, and Moses and Aaron engage in this initial offering to launch the use of the Mishkan, and launches the priests in their initial service in the Mishkan. And then at the end, what we've just read, this long list of the kinds of foods, the kinds of animals that we are forbidden to eat, those which we're allowed to eat. And in between those two, if you will, ritual aspects, the launching of the Mishkan and this list of food that we are forbidden to eat, in the middle there is this very dramatic story about Nadav and Abihu, Aaron's sons. And I'm not sure how it affects you. I'd be interested to hear whether the fact that that dramatic narrative story occurring in the middle of the Torah portion, does it make you kind of, does it bury it for you, or does it highlight that story for you? I'm curious to hear what you think. I'd like to share with you a little bit of a focus study that's based on the incident of Nadav and Abihu, and then we'll open it up and everyone can share with one another your reflections, responses, and thoughts about the weekly Torah portion. In the study sheet that I prepared, I have at the very top a graphic. It's a mixed media by a wonderful artist, Nishima Kaplan, and she calls this Havdalah. And you'll recognize many of the ritual items that are included in a Havdalah ritual that we perform on Saturday nights. You have the wine, the candle, the incense, and so these are all part of the ritual elements for observing Havdalah. Why Havdalah? Why did I have that as the graphic representing this week's Torah portion? Well, let's see. Let's delve a little bit further into some of the commentary and see what the connection might be between Havdalah and what's happening within this Torah portion. And our study, I've entitled Sacred Division. And our Torah portion opens up with these words, on the 8th day. Something very dramatic happens on the 8th day. something that is both awesome and wonderful and good, which is this initial offering, and then this presence of God combusts upon the scene among the Israelites. And then also something quite tragic, which is this incident involving Nadav and Abihu, where they rush to offer an offering of their own that was not prescribed, and they somehow seem to be consumed as a result. They are perhaps burned up. Something terrible happens to them. So the 8th day represents this threshold moment, when we can enter into a completely new world. And it's that threshold moment presents both wonderful opportunities and grave dangers. So we're going to explore this notion about the 8th day, this threshold moment, and what it means for us. There's, of course, there's a lot of commentary about Nadav and Abihu. What did they do wrong? Commentators want to know, that caused them to do either something that was foolish or that caused them to be destroyed. And there's a lot of commentary that says, oh, they were drunk, they were boastful, they were arrogant towards their father Aaron and their uncle Moses, saying, look what they can do. We can do something even better. So there's a lot of commentary that's critical of Nadav and Abihu, but there's also a lot of commentary that has a great deal of compassion for Nadav and Abihu. And so it's that line of commentary that I want to explore with us over the next few moments. So if you have the study sheet, you can look at number 2, which is from Midrash Sifra, which says, overwhelmed by joy on perceiving the new fire, they, meaning Nadav and Abihu, sought to redouble their love, whereupon they took each one his censer. So here's a midrash that is saying, in a sense, Nadav and Abihu watch their uncle and their father bring this offering before God. The mighty fire of God comes down, consumes the offering, and it must have been truly both a terrifying, an awesome, and a completely consuming moment, this moment of celebration and joy that God received the offering and was an indication of God's presence and support for the Israelites. And in response to that, it is as if Nadav and Abihu impetuously get swept up in the moment. And it says they are overwhelmed by joy on seeing this presence of God, and they seek to bring something of their own into that moment. So here in number 3, we move quite ahead in time for our next bit of commentary. It's from Moses Mendelssohn. Moses Mendelssohn, one of the great Jewish philosophers who lived in the 18th century. He's considered one of the founders of the Jewish Enlightenment movement, which was based upon reason and rationality. And his commentary is called the Biur. And he wrote this: Nadav and Abihu did not maliciously transgress the word of God, but in their superabundant joy, they lost their judgment and entered the Holy of Holies to burn fine incense, although this had not been commanded. In their excessive love, they were eager to minister before God with the new incense, in addition to the dedicatory offerings of the day. Here is Moses Mendelssohn, great rationalist, who is kind of following up on this more ancient midrash from Sifra that says, no, Nadav and Abihu, they were not being mischievous. They weren't drunk. They weren't trying to take over from Moses and Aaron. They were filled with love, and they just wanted to bring something additional to present to God. They were wrapped up in some kind of excessive love or according to Moses Mendelssohn. This notion of excessive love, of becoming immersed in this total impetuous absorption in love, is something that some commentary is now going to caution us about. Here is a more contemporary commentary from Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. Writes, whatever one experiences when one enters the holy domain must be carried with them when one returns to the everyday world. One must not seek ecstasy for its own sake, but for the sake of the subsequent return. A religious experience must not be left as a memory. It must remain active in animating the whole of one's life. So here is a critique of Nadav and Abihu, which essentially is saying Nadav and Abihu were spiritual seekers. They wanted to experience God in God's immediacy. They wanted to, in effect, lose themselves within the divine. They wanted to have an ecstatic experience and lose themselves within that. And Rabbi Schneerson is saying, the purpose for having that kind of contact with the divine is not to get lost in it, is not to remain within it. The purpose of having that kind of contact with the divine is to re-enter everyday life, elevated by it, informed by it, transformed by it, and then to infuse your experience into everyday life. That's the purpose of having these kind of contacts, which apparently was not either the intent or the consequence of what Nadav and Abihu did. Let's follow this a little bit further. If you turn over, if you have the study sheet, we're going to look at another midrash. This is an older midrash that can be found in Bereshit and also in Masechet Pesachim. And this is about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. When the sun set upon the departure of the Sabbath, the darkness became palpable as the sun set. The first human was terrified and exclaimed, "Surely darkness comes to bruise me. Perhaps the one of whom it is said, 'He shall bruise your head,' will come to attack me." What did the Blessed Holy One do? God presented the human with two flints, which the human struck together, and light came forth. Whereupon the human blessed it. "Blessed are you, Adonai our God, who creates the lights of fire." Let's pause for a moment and think about the setting that this midrash is talking about. The setting is the Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve, first human beings, are created on day 6. This fear of departure, this fear of the darkness comes not on the first night of their existence, Friday night. It comes on Saturday night, the end of the 7th day. It comes at that threshold moment when the 7th day is turning into the day beyond the 7th day, which we could characterize as the 8th day. It's that moment when the human being becomes frightened and fearful of what is the light that is being lost. It might not be the light of the sun so much, because according to the story, these two humans have already experienced that. They experienced it presumably Friday night. It's a spiritual light that they're afraid of losing. They don't want to let go of that. They don't want to let go of Shabbat. And so what does God do? God doesn't give them more light. God gives them tools by which they can create light. And the human beings do that. They bring light, they are relieved, and they bless the source that has enabled them to have this light. So here is this notion that the human beings who are afraid of being cast out from the presence of God that Shabbat represents, that's the light they're afraid of losing. They are given the tools to create their own kind of light that will comfort them. Let's take this a little further and see what the rabbis do with this notion of human initiative to create light. Number 6 is another midrash from another collection, Tanhuma, and it's going to talk about a couple of interesting characters. One is Tyrannus Rufus. Tyrannus Rufus was a Roman consul in the after the fall of the second temple. He was charged with trying to put down the remaining bits of Jewish rebellion against Roman occupation. And the other character is one of those who's leading the rebellion against Rome, and that's Rabbi Akiva. One of the other fascinating aspects, according to the biographies that we read about Rabbi Akiva and Tyrannus Rufus, is that at some point, the first wife of Rabbi Akiva dies, and then Tyrannus Rufus himself dies, and Rabbi Akiva marries the widow of Tyrannus Rufus. So, but let me share with you this bit of midrash. Tyrannus Rufus asked Rabbi Akiva, whose works are better, those of God or those of humans? Let's just stop there for a second. You ask a spiritual leader, a spiritual guide, and says, whose works are better, God's or humans? And of course, the Roman has a clear answer, which is, well, of course, the works of humans are greater, because look what we Romans have done. We've built these roads and aqueducts and built an empire. We've established laws. We've made beautiful architecture and statues and art. So you would expect Rabbi Akiva to say in response, no, the works of God are greater than the works of man. Here's what Rabbi Akiva says. The rabbi replied, those of humans. The rabbi set before the governor ears of grain and cakes. And the Rabbi Akiva said, the unprocessed grain is the work of God. The cake is the work of the human. Is it not more pleasant to eat cake than raw ears of grain? What a stunning statement for Rabbi Akiva to make, that it is what humans make that is greater, more pleasant than what God makes. Quite extraordinary. This is where the rabbinic tradition really emphasizes the role of human initiative in bringing about holiness and sanctity into this world, rather than merely waiting for God, if you will, to intervene and present it to us. I want to acknowledge that in 1997, it was April 6, 1997, which was a Sunday, one of the great American Jewish poets died, Allen Ginsberg. So Allen Ginsberg died on April 6th, Sunday. The day before, April 5th, 1997, was Shabbat, and the Torah portion for that Shabbat was Shemini, the Torah portion that we're reading. You can think of the fact that Allen Ginsberg dies the day after Shabbat. You can think of that as the 8th day. And Allen Ginsberg wrote one of his great works as Howl, and that has a great line about, I've seen the best minds of my generation run stark raving mad through the streets. And his work, Howl, is divided up into 4 portions. And 2 of those portions are focusing on a way of honoring and celebrating those that he saw as living outside the boundaries of general society, people who saw themselves as misfits, people who either could not or chose not to fit into the norms of society. And Allen Ginsberg celebrates those individuals. He sees them as actually being the seeds of some form of salvation for modern society as a whole. And he focuses on two individuals in particular. One is Neil Cassidy, who was a beat poet and writer himself, who was characterized as was frenetic energy, a very rogue lifestyle. And in his mind, that made him a hero to Allen Ginsberg. The other individual that he mentions in this work, Howell, is that of Carl Solomon. Carl Solomon is someone that Allen Ginsberg met when they were both in a mental institution together. And for Allen Ginsberg, Carl Solomon really exemplified the insanity that occurs when a person cannot accept or live within the expectations of and norms of modern society. And so the poem, this 4-part poem, Howl, glorifies their and others like them, their sacrifices of their sanity, their status, and their wealth for the sake of opening up society to new possibilities of beauty and truth. Holiness, Allen Ginsberg says, can actually be found in such violation of norm and can be found in such insanity. I bring that to you because one way of understanding what's happening with the Nadav and the Abihu is they are the beat poets of their times. They are the non-conforming artists who seek to pursue some other kind of truth and beauty that has not been prescribed by the norms of their community. It's a very difficult road to be on. It's a very difficult frame of mind to maintain. And that's what Allen Ginsberg bears testimony to through all of his work, that those who really experience this other kind of truth and beauty cannot exist successfully within society as a whole. So at the end of his poem, Howl, he has what he calls the footnote, this fourth portion, the footnote to Howl, in which he begins to characterize everything that society as a whole thinks of as ugly and uncomfortable and taboo is really also contains beauty within it. And so he has this refrain that I've just accepted a few words from in number 7. So as part of the footnote to Howl, he wrote, "The world is holy, the soul is holy, the skin is holy, the nose is holy, everything is holy, everybody is holy, everywhere is holy." For Allen Ginsberg is sharing with us this notion that what we see as odd and strange, maybe even ugly, can actually be an opening to a different kind of beauty. What we've witnessed, especially for those artists and poets who pursue this as a constant within their life, we see how difficult it is to sustain contact with that kind of holiness. Allen Ginsberg is saying, to be in such sustained contact with holiness necessarily leads to an outsider status, to an ostracism, to incarceration, and even to institutionalization. It's a hard place to be in all the time. That's why I introduced this notion about Havdalah. Havdalah occurs at the end of Shabbat. This is what Adam and Eve, in effect, are ritualizing as they begin to fear leaving just the complete immersion in God's presence. And God doesn't do something, doesn't take that away. God gives them the implements and tools to create their own light. That's what Havdalah is about. Havdalah is a way for us to ease out of the immersion in Shabbat, that suspension of time, when all we're experiencing, hopefully, is a sense of peace and oneness and restoration. Havdalah reminds us it's time to leave. You have work to do. God is responsible in the story of creation for the first 7 days, brings everything about. After those first 7 days, it's up to you, humans, to begin to bring light into the world. I noticed Neshima Kaplan on the page where she presents this work of art about Havdalah. She has this little poem that she wrote that I have here in number 8. She writes, "Remember to separate two flames once again. Union will come soon. Shamor v'zachor."
I should remember.
It's important to immerse ourselves into the oneness, and then it's also important for us to separate from the oneness so that we can take what we've gained from that experience of immersion and imbue it into the rest of the world. So with that, let me invite everyone to offer up your thoughts and comments and reflections and responses to what we've encountered in our reading of our portion this week. If you'd like to hold up your hand, Susan, go ahead and unmute and share with us.
Okay, so one of the things about this story that has always intrigued me is when Moses says, come forward and carry your kinsmen away, it says it carried them out by their tunics. Well, that's not really normal how you would carry somebody out. So I've always questioned whether there was anything left, whether God actually just brought them all up to be with God, as opposed to killing them.
Yes, so first of all, there's a lot of midrash that's not included here that talks about Moses and Aaron kind of acknowledging, oh, I thought one of us would be the person who would be those most honoring of God, but it turns out it was Nadav and Abihu. So there's midrash that says, now we understand Nadav and Abihu, they are the ones who are really serving as an honorific for God. So yeah, one way of understanding that is that they were brought up to God, or kind of in line with the Howell introduction that I brought to you, is that maybe they just went mad. Maybe they just could not re-enter because they had some intense contact with the divine. They couldn't re-enter polite society again. They become madmen, outcasts. Maybe that's what was happening to them.
But it seems also to me that the fact that Aaron and his family is told that you cannot mourn them.
Yeah.
That the community will mourn them, but you cannot mourn them. It's like what's happened to them isn't something that's to be mourned.
Ah, very nice. So there's actually midrash about that as well. Exactly. So, which is that Aaron understood that this wasn't a mourning event, that the rest of the people who witnessed what happened, they would have that reaction. Oh my gosh, they died. We need to mourn them. But there's something Aaron perceives that this is not that kind of an event. It's more like what you're talking about. Thank you. So Paul and then Mark.
Just things. One about the point that Susan raised, the idea that being brought up to God, do Jewish people really believe, in this afterlife? So I think that you're raising that question, Susan, and I think the rabbi bit. So, so that was the first. I have a second question point. You brought up Allen Ginsberg in the I think it was about 1962. There was in San Francisco a bookstore, a band just banned books, and so it attracted my attention. And I bought this book called it was called Howl. And the result of that was when my son left my house permanently to start his own life, since he was a minimalist, he went to the garage, all the books, and he picked out one book to take with him, and he still has it. And it's called Howl. So there are people that agree with you.
Okay, thank you. Well, Mark? Go ahead and unmute. Yeah.
I was also interested in what Susan had to say, and your explanation of it now makes more sense to me because I'd be curious to know what the Midrash says about Aaron's non-reaction or underwhelming reaction to the loss of his sons. But then it occurred to me that when Eleazar and Ithamar caused a minor disturbance by not eating the sin offering in the sacred area, Aaron didn't exactly react to that in a way that a normal father would react to his sons having just been obliterated. You would think a normal father would say, hey, look what happened to your brothers. I mean, how could you possibly think of violating even this? But he doesn't. He just points out in a very matter-of-fact way that they didn't follow the prescribed laws. And I still think it's fascinating that the family isn't allowed to mourn, but the community is. And I'd just like to know more what the Midrash, what the rabbinical literature would have to say more about that.
Okay, I can either post on our Facebook page or send it to you directly, Mark. There's this Midrash about Aaron's understanding about what has happened to his sons and how it affects the community one way and it affects him in an entirely different way because of his perception about what's happened. But yes, it is very provoking. Thank you. Okay, and others who'd like to share, go ahead, Jay, unmute. Go ahead, Jay. You'll need to unmute if you'd like to share with us. Thank you. There you go.
Darn mute button. Is that the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Schneerson, Rabbi
Yeah.
Schneerson? Is that the current, is that the late Rebbe?
Yeah.
From that died? Okay. And then the second thing is when she says, the artist says, remember to separate two flames once again. Is she referring to the Havdalah candle?
Okay.
Is it the two?
So what she's actually referring to
That's
there
the question.
is a notion, an image that the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidic Judaism, presents about when two people get married. When two people get married, the Baal Shem Tov says you have two separate flames, and then they get intertwined, and they create one great light that brings new light up to heaven. And she looked at that because she's also a ketubah artist. So that's a theme that comes up. And she said, is that really what marriage is all about? Is two separate individuals coming together and just creating some union where they are now completely merged into one another? And she reflected upon this. And she said, I think what happens is it's important for, after that moment of coming together, for those individuals also to separate and have their own distinct personalities as well. And then there'll be other opportunities for re-intertwining and then separating and re-intertwining and separating and so forth. So that's what she was playing with there. But that's of course what the Havdalah.
More of a,
Yes, go ahead. Shamor v'zachor, yes,
No.
to protect.
Shalom v'zachor v'dibur echad, hishmianu. That's from, is that from the, I think, is that from the Chadodi, or is that from Shamor v'zachor v'dibur echad, hishmianu al echad?
Yeah.
That's where where does that come from?
So Shamor v'zachor, these are instructions that we have about what we're supposed to do about Shabbat in Torah. We're supposed to observe or protect it, guard it, and to remember it. And some people say that's why we have 2 candles for Shamor v'zachor, for observing and remembering on Shabbat. And then what's fascinating is that the Havdalah candle has these multiple wicks that are wrapped together to create this single candle. So those are some of the images and themes that she was playing with, both in her artwork and in this little poem that she wrote. Others like to share any thoughts, reflections, responses to our Torah portion? Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for, oh, Dave, yes, thank you, Dave. Go ahead.
Okay, about the Abihu and Nadav story, when you're reading at it, it kind of made me think of cults. And were these 2 people so enthusiastic, God was afraid that they may be starting a cult where everybody would be following them as cult leaders. Because he did, he had to take the action that he did. What do you think of that? Is that far out or what?
Dave, I think that's a really helpful addition to the conversation, to say what this sounds like to me. What I'm sensing here is a kind of fanaticism, where people are just acting impetuously on impulse and on their emotions, and they throw themselves at this object of their love and their passion and their devotion, and as a result of it, they lose their individual identity. Their individuality gets consumed, if you will.
I think the danger is people following them. And I think that was the big danger of this exuberance.
Exuberance. And I'm with you, Dave. I think that's really important to point out. Thank you so much. Okay. And go ahead, Justin.
I guess I'd like to know a little bit more about the word or the meaning of this Eish Zorah, of the fire that is the foreign fire. I'm wondering whether, I mean, there are injunctions against any foreign fires, but I'd like to know more about what was going on here with that term of that.
What do you imagine? Justin, what do you imagine?
Well, I mean, it could go along the line of bring lights from other religions or other false idols, and so I'm just curious whether is it something that's from the external as this spiritual practice is being developed, right as they've developed it, suddenly they're bringing in foreign fires from other religious perspectives.
So in years past, when we have studied the book of Leviticus, what I've started us off thinking about is how the book of Leviticus is a voice, a particular voice within Torah. It's a particular point of view within Torah that is very concerned about boundaries, lines of differentiation, concern about erupting beyond borders. That's why there's a lot of mention in here about fluids coming out of the body when they're not supposed to, and a lot of distress about violations of boundaries and borders. And so, and of course, the Levites were charged with overseeing a system that was very detailed in its prescriptions about what was to be offered when. So we could say that it is that perspective that says dangerous things happen when you violate these prescriptions, when you cross boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. So it's a particular point of view which, we should heed and learn from. It's not the only voice that speaks within Torah, but it's certainly the one that dominates within this book that we're reading right now. And so the notion of something being offered that wasn't part of the prescription is abhorrent to this particular point of view. Yeah, whatever it might be. Susan, did you have something else you'd like to add? Go ahead and unmute first. Thank you.
I was just going to say that the discussion about light and the discussion about Ginsburg reminded me that Ferlinghetti just died at 111 about a month and a half ago. And I think his store was City Lights or
City Lights in San Francisco. Yeah. Yeah.
kind of the godfather of the beat poets.
Oh, absolutely.
It was a haven and sanctuary of very, very, very modern poetry and playwrights and so forth, and gave voice to that. Go ahead, Margot.
Just since we're talking about Ginsburg and City Lights, my daughter had the opportunity to see and be in the same room with Ginsburg at sometime, obviously, before he died.
Okay, you got a little frozen there, Margot. So
I forget the name of the gallery, the art gallery, but it's one that's very, very prestigious. And Ginsburg was in that, and my daughter just, she could barely contain herself to be in the same room with Ginsburg, next to him, near him.
Very, very powerful figure. Go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
Was Ginsburg diagnosed with a bipolar disorder?
I don't know exactly what he was diagnosed, what the diagnosis was, to be honest.
I just, in the description of Nadav and Abihu, I just think about the people that I know that have been diagnosed with bipolar disorders, and they have this imbalance. There's this differentiation between being just elated and then just what is the exact opposite of that. And it's a scary thing. And it just made me think of the issues that bipolar disorders present to society and to people that are afflicted with it, and made me think of Nadav and Abihu. I just wondered if Ginsburg and the fellow that he was in the mental institution with were diagnosed with that as well.
As I recall, there was a movie that was made several years ago, and I believe it was based on a true story. And I believe it was about a nun who had, I think it was a brain tumor that was causing her to have visions of some kind, holy visions. I mean, visions that were of the presence of God. And she was told that if this could be a very serious condition, it could lead to her death, and that there was surgery that could be performed that would relieve her of this tumor, and likely the visions would go away as well. And so the movie is about, which do you want?
Did she opt for the surgery?
Let's find out. Let's leave it hanging there for a moment, okay? And because I don't want to spoil it, but that's the conundrum, right?
Yeah.
To be able to experience something that no one else sees or hears can be very precious and very frightening. And what do you do with that? How do you live with that? Or do you desperately not want to live with that? These are the kind of questions.
Yeah.
And I bring in Allen Ginsberg just as one example of, he was a relatively successful artist, but there are many other artists who also encounter this contact with another reality that other people around them don't seem to have, and are not successful in terms of being able to market what they are creating. And yet they're still living with this kind of perception of something beyond what other people can see. And it makes it difficult for them to insert themselves into everyday life.
Well,
And
Esther Pound was in St. Elizabeth's in Washington, D.C.
yeah.
Institutionalized there.
So I want to conclude by just saying that I hope that whether or not we each perform the actual ritual that has been prescribed to us of Chavdalah, I hope that we all have some kind of appreciation for the rabbinic instruction about how important it is not to get lost within these ecstatic moments of encountering the divine. But the only reason for having those encounters is to then return from them and then to be able to imbue the world around us with what we've learned from those moments. So again, I'll end with Neshima Kaplan's little poem, "Remember to separate. Two flames once again. Union will come soon. Shamor V'Zahor." God bless you all. Look forward to our regathering next week. Thank you very much for helping me grow and learn further. I'm so grateful. Thank
Rabbi,
you.
you
Thank
may
you,
buy
Rabbi.
me this painting. You may buy this painting for me.
Okay. I will do that, Margot. I'll work on it.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I'm not paying for it.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Be well, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, you too, Rabbi. Be well.